Come take a trip to the wild lands of Cothique, a windswept and untamed region of Ulthuan. Here, high elf lords engage in intrigues of all kinds as the forces of chaos secretly plot the downfall of the kingdom. This is the focus of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Sea Wardens of Cothique from Cubicle 7 Games, and I'll share my review right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Sea Wardens of Cothique from Cubicle 7 Games. This is written by Dave Allen, Michael Duxbury, June Hornborg, Naomi Hunter, Stephen Lewis, and Simon Weilman. This 96-page hardcover with PDF is available now, carries an MSRP of $34.99. If you want to get that free PDF, you should order from Cubicle 7 Games. Now, if you just want the PDF alone, you can score that over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Sea Wardens of Cothique for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Cubicle 7 Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review video with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. Then lastly, there is an adventure framework as well as developing intrigues, which are contained within. As a player, it's possible as I'm flipping through the book, you might see something which would be considered a spoiler as far as those go. I highly doubt that's going to happen, but just in case, I thought I would let you know. First thing we'll do is take a look at the credits page. Actually, should point out, I like these end papers here. Pretty cool. Anyway, here's the credits page. Let's give credit where credit is due. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life. I will say I'm very impressed by how much content is packed into these 96 pages. We are going to start off with a gazetteer about the Kingdom of Cothique, the coastline, the mainland, as well as the various islands which surround that, and the magics which are at work to help keep the enemies of Cothique at bay, and it is the Shifting Isles. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of the magics that helps protect Melnibone in the Elric novels from Michael Moorcock. I thought that was kind of cool. I would not be surprised if that is an inspiration for the Shifting Isles. We'll get info about the islands as well. So as you can see here, get a few paragraphs devoted to each. Then we'll dive on into the culture of the kingdom. So we'll find out more about the Prince's Council, the princes and princesses of the kingdom, the military units, magic, religion, and so forth. We don't get tons and tons of info, but just enough to give the game master a good working feel for the lands of Cothique. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the Elves of Cothique are not like other high elves. They tend to be more emotional. They're not as distant or reserved as other high elves. There's a bit more swash to their buckle, I would say. So playing an Elf of Cothique is going to be a little bit different role-playing wise than if you were playing as other high elves. We'll get information about the port city of Tor Corlai, taking a wild guess as far as that pronunciation. And I would say that the port city should be the setting for a lot of adventuring if you are running tales in Cothique. As I mentioned early on, we've got these developing intrigues, and you'll see they're color-coded gems here. So sprinkled throughout the book, you will see these different gems. And as I pointed out, there is an adventure framework that's in Sea Wardens of Cothique. We don't have an adventure per se. I do honestly wish we did, but we do get an adventure framework, and it does incorporate these intrigues as well. Speaking of intrigues, because the Elves of Cothique feel that they're protected from outside enemies, they tend to spend a lot of their time involved in intrigues, both political and social. There are some rules regarding those sorts of adventures later on in the book, too. There's a map of that port city. As far as production quality, really nicely done. Very solid paper stock. Artwork throughout, very cool. Most of it is grayscale, as we've come to see with a lot of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition releases, especially when we're seeing character artwork, which is fine. We do have a lot of NPCs mixed throughout, so they could be used as patrons, they could be enemies. There are a couple of princes that will probably cross paths with player characters adventuring in Cothique. I would feel they're probably more likely to be enemies or rivals of the player characters as opposed to patrons. But we do have quite a few NPCs that I could easily see being patrons of the player characters. Now, there are forces at work below the surface that are trying to undermine Cothique. Chaos is present in Cothique. I wouldn't say it's running rampant, but still, it is present. There are also forces of the Norse who are looking to overthrow the kingdom as well. So there are enemies within and without. Also, throughout the book, you're going to see these fish hooks. Now, they're adventure hooks, but the reality, I consider a hook to be a way to get players involved in an adventure. I find these to be more along the lines of adventure nuggets or kind of storyline ideas. I mean, they're all throughout and they're very cool. I like them a ton. I just wouldn't call them a hook. That's all. So we're also going to have a bestiary with some new monsters. As I mentioned, we have the new rules for more social intrigues and political intrigues and playing around in a noble's court. There's one of our possible patrons and possible enemies in Ancient Spite. I thought it would be Sprite, but it's not. It says it's a Spite. So here is an example of going into a bit more detail about these developing intrigues. As I had mentioned, we do have these adventure frameworks. We don't necessarily have a plotted out adventure, but I would say that the adventure frameworks that are present here should fairly easily translate into some pretty fun adventures at your game table. There is a spy who's also an assassin who's probably going to play a major role in any sort of campaign you're running here. So here are some of the bestiary entries. Unleash the Kraken. And then we'll start getting into those rules about playing intrigues. So intrigues in courts, intrigues involving other nations, other kingdoms, trade, endeavors, intriguing NPCs. I thought this was a nice addition to the book. All right, then we wrap up with our index. And as a peek inside, Sea Wardens of Cothique for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay from Cubicle 7 Games. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I should mention there are no new careers in Sea Wardens of Cothique. And when I was originally reading the book, I was kind of surprised. And then I immediately realized, hold on, the High Elf Player's Guide came out just before this hit in PDF. So the reality is the High Elf Player's Guide is jam-packed with careers. That's why you don't see any in this volume. It's also important to keep in mind that both those books do complement each other very, very nicely. This is really packed with content. And as I started off the video, I was surprised by how much is packed inside these 96 pages. We've got the gazetteer, which I appreciate the fact that the gazetteer does not wear out its welcome. I don't need multiple pages about an island that I'm probably not going to be setting any adventuring on. So we get nice bite-sized chunks of info for the game master to utilize without overwhelming us with details that we aren't going to use at the game table. We've got a lot of really interesting NPCs that can be used as patrons or as rivals or as enemies or just as some additional flavor in the adventures. I like the adventure framework. I do wish we had an actual adventure, not just the framework, but we do have those developing intrigues, which sort of helps make up for that. Speaking of intrigues, we get some new intrigue rules, as well as some game master advice for running those sorts of adventures and those sorts of settings in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I really like what's included in this book, but I do have a critique. And it's probably just me, but in my opinion, when the focus strays away from the Empire, and we're not talking about Middenheim or Ubersreich or the Reichland, and we start moving into like Dwarven kingdoms, Elven kingdoms, I think what makes Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay stand out and makes it unusual compared to other fantasy role-playing games is sort of lost. Because when we're in the Empire, we've got the little bit of horror angle as well as satire. And I love the fact that usually people don't believe the player characters because the player characters, for the most part, especially early on, are nobodies. And most of nobility is moronic. They're idiots. I get a kick out of that. But then when we move to Dwarven kingdoms, Elven kingdoms, I still like that content, but that content starts to feel more like other fantasy role-playing games. That Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay isn't standing out as much as it did when we had a little bit of humor in the proceedings, a little bit of spookiness to the proceedings. Just my opinion. But I do dig Sea Wardens of Cothique, don't get me wrong. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Sea Wardens of Cothique an 8.5 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you dig the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites. And to do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get 5% as commission. And all those commissions really do add up, help keep thegaminggang.com around. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal and become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links down in the show notes. Also in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to the Discord server we've got. Absolutely free to sign up. So be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. And if you ring the bell, please select all notifications. Now, that doesn't guarantee you're going to find out every time I share a review video or other standalone videos, or even be notified when my live stream, The Gaming Gang Dispatch, which airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, happens to air. But if you don't select all notifications, you probably will not. Just so you know. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.